morning, my dear friends. I think it was all about technology problem. I hope most of you are able to see me now. I hope you're able to hear me. As we all sit cooped inside our homes, trying to be safe as we can in these days of pandemic. Are we really prepared for what we should be? Yes, and that is being by ourselves. That's being by ourselves, yes. Are you lonely? Are you in solitude? Are you happy? Are you unhappy? We need to ask ourselves these questions. And that is why I have called my talk to you today from loneliness to solitude. From loneliness to solitude. If you're not very particular about the use of language, many of you might well say, what is the great difference between the two? After all, isn't loneliness being by yourself? Isn't solitude being by yourself? Yes, my dear listeners, my dear friends, I do agree that once we look at it, it does seem as if loneliness and solitude are the same. But are they really the same? As a teacher of English, I honestly believe that there are no synonyms. Though for years and years in schools we've all learnt synonyms or paryayavachi shabda, and we think that the words mean the same. But let me tell you, no, there cannot be any actual synonym. Because I honestly believe that there are shades of meaning. If you can talk of light green and dark green and army green and mehendi green and what have you, why not different shades of meaning for words? So let me tell you, to me, loneliness is a very, very negative feeling. And what is that? Loneliness is being abandoned. Loneliness is being destitute. Loneliness is being forlorn, maybe forsaken, maybe friendless, maybe desolate. But what about solitude? I want to say here again that yes, both loneliness and solitude is being by yourself, is being alone, is being without others. Have you ever been to a wedding where there are hundreds of people? I have, because I often go to weddings of my students where I don't know anyone except the bride or the groom. And there I'm sitting in the midst of 100, maybe 500 people, all equally dressed for the occasion, all happy to be there. But I am lonely. Why am I lonely? Because I've come there, but I really don't know anyone. So I can be lonely in a crowd. I can be in solitude, and I may not be lonely. So I was telling you that to me, loneliness is, after all, a very, very negative feeling. And somehow it seems to empty you. What about solitude? Solitude is by choice. Solitude is what you can enjoy. Solitude, which what fills you with your thoughts. Solitude is privacy. Solitude is peace. Solitude is quiet, and much more. So let me begin by a poem by Wordsworth. Not really the entire poem, but the first couple of lines, where he tells us, behold her, he says. She's there, the reaper. She's reaping corn. She's all alone. But he does not call her the lonely reaper. He calls her the solitary reaper. The poem itself is called The Solitary Reaper. So in these days, when we're all inside our houses with no opportunity to see the fields ready for harvest. I would like you to take your imagination. Remember, we are in solitude, so we are enjoying being by ourselves. So can you just imagine for a moment that you are out there, lehrate kheton mein, and what do you see there? You see a woman, a solitary reaper, as Wordsworth calls her. She's reaping. Remember, she is by herself, but she is not lonely. She is not lonely. Why is she not lonely? She is not lonely. I'm sorry, tech problem again, but I hope you can see me. She is not lonely because she's enjoying being by herself. And what is she doing? As she is singing, as she is reaping, she's singing. As she is singing, she's reaping. And our poet walks by. He is also by himself. He is a solitary walker there. And what does he see? And what does he see? He sees his reaper. But he says, I carry the song in my heart. My dear listeners, my dear friends, I want to ask you that if I were in a milling crowd, would I have heard the sound of the reaper? She's singing in a language I don't know, but there is something in the music of the song which appeals to me. So I'm talking about being by yourself. Yes, being by yourself. But is it a feeling of loneliness that comes to you? No, it's not a feeling of loneliness. It's a feeling of solitude. Many of you, I'm sure, you women there, certainly, and maybe some of you men too, are thinking of solitaires. Oh yes, we are thinking of diamonds. Can I have a ring? A solitaire. The word is solitaire. You know, if you look at the etymology, and if you go back to Latin, from where both these words come, there might be something similar in the beginning of the word. But that doesn't mean a thing, my dear students. It doesn't mean a thing. Because words change with usage. Remember, whenever we look at a word in isolation, maybe the word loneliness and the word solitude in any English dictionary, in the Oxford Student's Companion or something, would probably just tell you that it means being by yourself. But I want you to understand the context. Why am I talking about moving from loneliness to solitude? Loneliness to solitude. It's important, my dear friends, as most of us are now doing things which we never expected we would have to do, cooped inside our house, whether you live in a 1 or 2 bedroom flat, or you live in a huge bungalow, or you have a farmhouse, or you have a haveli. We are all right in there. And that is why I'm talking about moving from loneliness to solitude. You have not chosen probably to be there. But now that you are there, what can you do to make it great? What can you do to ensure that you are enjoying it? That is what I'm going to be talking about again and again, repeating myself, but bringing in various reasons why solitude is enjoyable. I'm a senior citizen, almost reaching 70. And for the last 45 years, maybe, I've been walking. And more often than not, I prefer to walk alone. I walk alone, but I am not lonely. I choose my solitude as I walk on the streets of Ahmedabad, or in a garden, or in the woods, or wherever. I prefer to walk alone. I prefer to walk in solitude. Why is this solitude important to me? Because when someone asked me, aren't you bored being by yourself? I said, no, I'm not bored. I'm not bored being by myself. And why? Because I love to relive the past and probably dream about the future. This is not some great philosophy I'm talking about, my dear friends. I'm talking about how solitude can be so enjoyable. Because remember, after all, your only companion from birth to death, your only constant companion from birth to death is you yourself. And if you are not happy being with yourself, there must be something wrong. I have to move out of this negative feeling of feeling that I'm not happy being by myself. Yes, I do know, and I know all of us know, that we are basically social animals. Man is a social animal. Remember your 6th or 7th class civics book, where we began with that. Of course we are social, and I am a very social person. But I want to point out to you repeatedly that being by yourself, provided you accept that it is solitude that you have chosen, can be very enjoyable. So I was talking about my morning walk. So here I am walking alone. It could be in Law Garden, which is very close to my house. It could be walking on the streets of Ahmedabad. It could be in a beautiful place when I visit my daughter in a European town. It could be in the woods. It could be by the riverside. It could be by a lake, wherever I am. I love being in solitude. Because what am I doing? I am able to be with myself. And why is it so important to be with yourself? It's important because, as one listener is just pointing out, it's me time. Of course it's me time. That's what I said. So when I am by myself, when I'm thinking about the past, I'm reliving so much of what I have enjoyed. Maybe I'm looking at moments when things went wrong, and I'm wondering what I've learned from that. Maybe I'm saddened. Maybe I'm thinking of people who are no more with us. And maybe tears, idle tears, as Tennyson told us in that poem, I do not know why they spring. They do spring. But after all, I don't want to live in the past. I want to live in the present. But the past gives me a direction where the present can take me into the future. Okay, so here I am by myself, in solitude, enjoying, thinking. When you think of the great rishis, I'm not going spiritual right now. Maybe I will towards the end of the lecture. But when I think of the great rishis, the munis, the ascetics, the sannyasis, the sannyasins, who gave up their life at home, what they were after having done the brahmacharya and having moved into the householder, what did they do? They decided to give up that and go. And where did they go? Up into the Himalayas, maybe into caves. Those of you who've been to Ajanta would remember the caves, those little niches inside those caves where the Buddhist monks sat when they wanted to meditate. They wanted solitude, because solitude gives you an opportunity to look into yourself. And here I'm not talking about going into your conscience and the subconscious and all that. I'm not going into all those great things. I'm only talking about maybe thinking back of the book that I read last month. I really didn't have time to really think about that story. You know, that movie that I saw, I didn't really dissect it. I did not really. So what do I need to do? Now that I'm in solitude, I spend some time. Yes, I was talking about those rishis and munis. And I remember this wonderful experience that I had in Anuradhapura. You know, Anuradhapura is a town in Sri Lanka, a very Buddhist town. It's another story whether Buddha went there or not. He's supposed to have reached there by levitation, but I'm not going to talk about that. But I'm talking about those rocks. You know, as far as the eye could see, there was no habitation. You were only looking at rocks all around. Rocks, overhanging rocks, rocks below you, rocks to the side of you, rocks above you, like charge of the light brigade. In front of me, behind me, by the side of me, everywhere there were rocks. But you know, when I sat there, all by myself in my solitude. Yes, I did have my driver. I did have my driver guide, and I wanted him to click pictures of me. I imagine I'd gone to 2,000 years ago, but that's not the point. But when I sat there in solitude, it almost seemed as if there was something happening within me, as if I could feel what the great Buddha must have felt when he was there in solitude. Yes, my dear, solitude can bring in within you the creative juices, the creative urge. This creativity could be anything. I mean, it could be in writing poetry. It could be a beautiful painting. It could be singing. Maybe it could be music. Maybe it could be going back into what you had experienced as a child. Maybe the games that you played which you don't play anymore. But the solitude gives me that ability, that encouragement, that inspiration, that ignition to take me back into that moment which meant so much. Not meant, I probably should get my tense right, and I should say, which means so much to me. As I sat thinking about in solitude, as I sat thinking about this lecture and what I should be talking about, I got on a few quotes which I would like to share with you. If you are lonely when you are alone, you are in bad company. If you are lonely when you are alone, you are in bad company. It says so much, as many of the great quotes do tell us. Who are you with? You are with yourself. Yes, we all love socializing, and we are waiting for the lockdown to be over. We are waiting for our cafes and restaurants to open. We are waiting for our parks to open. I want to go and watch all the movies that I love watching. I want to do that. But now that I'm by myself, who do I have for company? I know there are family members with us at home, but how much of time can we really spend talking to them? So what are we doing? We are in solitude. And who is giving you company? I want to read that again. If you are lonely when you are alone, you are in bad company, right? So learn to enjoy your company. And that's what solitude is all about. Solitude, another writer tells us, is the richness of the soul. Because here is a time where the chaos outside, where the noise outside, where honking of horns and people shouting and my vendors and everything else is suddenly stilled. And I am with myself. And what is the deepest part of me? A believer, someone with faith in the afterlife or in the before life and in karma would probably tell me, yes, it's the soul. Whether you believe in it or not is not important. I would say the most important part of you, the innermost recesses of yourself, is what solitude helps you to get. I remember it was Einstein, I think, who said somewhere that when you're young, when you're a kid, it's very difficult to enjoy solitude. But as you grow up, as you mature, you certainly learn to enjoy and appreciate solitude. I'm not sure what age my listeners are. I'm sure we have everyone from 20 to 70 maybe. But all of us have to understand how it is possible to enjoy solitude. Have you noticed little kids? Have you noticed little kids, 3, 4, 5? They're so happy talking to themselves, playing by themselves. What is it if not solitude? They probably being nearer to God, being nearer to the real experiences of life, probably they know better than you and me how to enjoy solitude. And that is why they are so happy talking to themselves, playing by themselves. Another quote that I have says, in solitude, the mind gains strength. In solitude, the mind gains strength and learns to lean upon oneself. Recently, my daughters are far more tech savvy than I am naturally, Gen Next, said something to me, one of those many LOLs and etc. that you have. They said something like FOMO. And what is that? I said, what is that? I probably fall into that category. I don't know if I'm ashamed saying that or happy saying that or proud saying that. I do fall into that category. And what is that category? The fear of missing out, FOMO. So all the time we want to be socializing. All the time we want to be where we can be seen. All the time we want to be doing things which people expect us to do. But when you are in solitude, what do you learn? You learn to fall upon yourself. It is your inner strength that, and as another writer pointed out, my greatest strength is solitude. My greatest strength is solitude, because so much happens from solitude. I'm wondering if Newton was not sitting alone, would he have noticed the apple fall? I'm wondering whether whether James Watt, if he was not looking at that, you remember what we read in school, if he was not looking at the kettle boiling, and if he did not try to bring it down, if he did not try to bring that down, the kettle lid, would we have what we have today? And of course, we've grown far beyond that. But the earliest engines that we had, the steam engine, they had to be alone. Galileo, think of any of the great scientists maybe. They all needed to be by themselves. I remember the romantic poets, for example, if I think of Keats, I was happy to see the garden where he's supposed to have heard the nightingale sing. Or maybe I don't know why I love to go back to the romantic poets, because I think they are the best poets in the English language. They take us into the midst of nature. Today, when I'm forced to sit alone on my balcony in solitude, I've looked at birds which I've not seen in the last 10 years as I've lived in this house. Why have I been able to see that? Because I'm in solitude. But I'm not lonely. I'm happy looking out at the plants around. I'm happy looking at the birds which come around. So this solitude can help us do a lot of things. The first point that I mentioned is creativity. The second important thing which many of us probably realize is that when we are by ourselves, when we are planning what to do, as many of you who are now working from home are doing, many students who are probably forced to do online classes, maybe those of us who are in solitude have time, what are we thinking of? We are thinking of things that can be done. Maybe I'm thinking of leadership roles. Maybe I'm thinking of how I can take my team forward. There is so much of possibility, my dear friends, for us to develop qualities which probably have been suppressed, qualities which we probably didn't realize existed. So here is an opportunity for us to look at those trends, to maybe look at those leadership qualities which I have, and which I probably now in solitude can develop. I also get an opportunity in solitude to break out of that fixed timetable which I had to follow. Some of my examples are very much related to the lockdown period, but all of us, those of us who live in Gujarat and many parts of India, have certainly for almost 2 months been so cooped up that my examples do come back to the period in which we are living. Most of us, I'm sure, would have never imagined that we would have to do it. If someone told me that I wouldn't be going out, and by God's grace I haven't been really sick ever, touch wood, I would never imagine that I could be without crossing the threshold, my door. I live in a flat, so going out of my flat for so many days, I wouldn't have believed it. So I'm also learning to appreciate this being in solitude, never allowing the feeling of loneliness to beat me. So what does it give me an opportunity? It gives me an opportunity. I'm quite old. Maybe I don't have too many years to plan for. But those of you who are much younger, here is an opportunity in solitude to look at your goals, to look at your aims, to look at your dreams, and to find paths. Because remember, with the poet, I would say, though the woods are lovely, dark and deep, and we are not in the woods, we are very much at home. So what would I say? that I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Yes, one of my favorite lines. It was also the favorite line of our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm told he had these lines on his table with a picture of his walking into the woods. But I'm talking about solitude giving you an opportunity to look at your goals, to plan your aims, to plan the route that you take, and to probably sing with the famous American poet, if not sing, at least recite. For I have miles to go, promises to keep. Let me say the whole verse for you because it's beautiful. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So here is an opportunity when you are in solitude to plan, to dream, and to see how one can reach one's goal. I'm going to give you an example of something which is not very happy and which the human race would love to forget, but we can't forget because unfortunately we never learn from history. I'm talking about an experience which a doctor who had spent a few years at Auschwitz, the Jewish concentration, one of the most infamous of the concentration camps of the Jews. And you heard this doctor who lived up to a ripe old age, who tells us that in the concentration camp, and I don't need to tell you how terrible the conditions were. I don't need to tell you how death stared them in the face. I don't need to tell you the kind of tortures that were inflicted upon them. But in the midst of all that, the doctor says he learned to be by himself. He learned to be in solitude. And he says this provided a kind of therapy. It had a therapeutic effect for him. So I guess those of us who are unlucky to find ourselves in the midst of that kind of trouble, can we at some stage look at the possibility of being within yourself, of going within yourself and enjoying your solitude. If the Jews could do it in a concentration camp, in as horrible a place as Auschwitz, I'm sure it's possible for many, many of us to do it again. To do it again and again. Can we see that it is much better to be by yourself, be alone, be in solitude, than to be in bad company? Of course, we do know that we can choose our friends. And Shakespeare said, show me his friends and I'll tell you the kind of man that he is. I'm going back to Polonius's advice to his son. That's long, long ago. But isn't it possible that very often we are forced into company which is not really our type? But in this process of socializing, I have no choice. And therefore, isn't it better under such circumstances to be alone, to be by yourself, than to be in bad company? Think about it. Think about how solitude can be so much better than being in bad company. We can also use, I think, solitude. We can use solitude as a moment of recharging. All of us need to recharge ourselves. Some of us do it by going back to reading. Some of us going back into meditation, into sleeping, into chatting, into going for walks, into watching a movie. Each one of us chooses our own way of recharging. But isn't it possible that recharging can be something which you do when you are in solitude? As someone said, we are all instructed in society, but we can be inspired in solitude. That has given me an opportunity to think about how important solitude is to me and to all of us. How important it is to move from loneliness to solitude. So what does solitude do for me? It brings back images. And I would like to conclude by quoting just a couple of lines from the great William Wordsworth, when he says, this poem probably all of you know, it's a poem called The Daffodils, where he wandered lonely as a cloud. He uses the word lonely, I'm sorry. I wandered lonely as a cloud, and then he goes on, and how he looks at a field of daffodils. They danced by the shore of the lake, and they were unending as the twinkling stars, etc., etc., etc. He goes on. He describes the beauty, the color, the numbers of the daffodils. But to me, since I'm talking about solitude, and I would like to conclude with the poet's words when he says, "For oft when on my couch I lie, pensive or in vacant mood, there flash before the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude." The daffodils that I've seen long, long ago, now, oft when on my couch I lie, in pensive or in vacant mood, they flash before the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. Your imagination, your recollection in equanimity. All the passions of the mind are now recollected when you are in solitude. Thank you so much, listeners and viewers. I've been getting a lot of messages calling it an excellent session. Somebody talking about crying and being happy too. Somebody talking about how the me time is important. Somebody reminding me that fear of missing out can also be the joy of missing out. Yes, why not, if I believe in solitude. I hope in the short session we have been able to see why it is so important to move away from the concept of loneliness to being in solitude and enjoying every moment of it. Thank you very much, Calorix and DPS East, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. Thank you so much.